Warning: the following content may be disturbing for some viewers, as it recounts the relentless pursuit of one of the most elusive criminals in American history. For over 4 decades, California lived in terror as a masked predator slipped through the night, leaving horror in his wake. Dubbed the Golden State Killer, he was responsible for over 50 rapes and 13 brutal murders. He appeared unstoppable, disappearing without a trace, his identity remaining a haunting mystery. Entire communities were left shattered by the devastation he caused. Yet no one could catch him. But as time passed, so did the technology he thought would never touch him. What law enforcement once saw as a hopeless pursuit would transform into a race against time, and his time was running out. How did a killer, who hid in plain sight for decades, finally get caught? In this story, we'll uncover how modern science brought a monster to justice after years of terror. And it all begins with a DNA breakthrough. The Golden State Killer's reign of terror began in the 1970s, a time when neighborhoods across California felt safe until they weren't. He would slip into homes, attacking unsuspecting victims in the dead of night, leaving behind a chilling signature of fear. By the time law enforcement realized they were dealing with a serial offender, the body count had begun to rise. Police were working tirelessly, but the killer was always one step ahead. He moved like a ghost, one investigator remarked. There were no fingerprints, no obvious clues. Leads would emerge, only to fizzle out as quickly as they came. Back then, forensic science was limited. Fingerprints, eyewitnesses, and basic criminal profiling were the primary tools at investigators' disposal. DNA technology, still in its infancy, wasn't yet available. Police formed task forces, and profiles were sketched, but as the years dragged on, the case grew colder. Detectives and families alike were left with the heavy weight of unfinished justice. Yet, some detectives refused to give up. The relentless pursuit of the Golden State Killer became an obsession for many. Entire lifetimes were dedicated to cracking this case, but for decades, the trail ran cold. What none of them knew was that buried in the evidence was the killer's own undoing. DNA samples, carefully collected and preserved. They just didn't have the tools yet to use it. The case was stalled, but not forever. The breakthrough was coming, and it would change everything. By the late 1990s, what seemed impossible in the 1970s was now within reach. DNA technology had advanced, and investigators, still haunted by the Golden State Killer's crimes, realized they had one last hope: the biological evidence carefully preserved from the crime scenes. A few strands of hair, blood samples. At the time, they were nearly useless, but now they could tell a story. In 2001, detectives took a bold step. They reanalyzed the old DNA samples using the latest technology. What they discovered was chilling. The same DNA appeared at multiple crime scenes across California, confirming what they had long suspected. It was all the work of one man. But while they had his DNA, they still didn't have a name. Enter 2018. A breakthrough technique called genetic genealogy had emerged. It was the same process people used to trace their family trees through companies like 23andMe or Ancestry. Investigators uploaded the killer's DNA to a public database, GED Match, hoping to find distant relatives of the suspect. What followed was a meticulous search, tracing family trees back generations to find the killer's identity. Finally, after decades of dead ends, law enforcement had their answer. The DNA that the killer thought would never betray him was now the key to bringing him to justice. The hunt was nearly over. While investigators worked tirelessly behind the scenes, a new voice emerged in the hunt for the Golden State Killer: true crime writer Michelle McNamara. She wasn't a detective, but her obsession with unsolved mysteries and justice propelled her into the heart of one of the country's coldest cases. Michelle became fascinated by the Golden State Killer in the early 2000s, and in 2013, she coined the name that would forever be associated with him. Through her blog, True Crime Diary, Michelle meticulously pieced together details about the case, scouring records and interviewing victims, witnesses, and retired detectives. She had no formal training, but her sharp instincts and dogged determination fueled her pursuit of answers. Michelle's relentless investigation helped shine a new spotlight on the case, reigniting public interest. She was convinced that modern technology, combined with tireless research, could one day lead to the killer's capture. In 2018, she published I'll Be Gone in the Dark, a best-selling book that not only detailed her own investigation, but humanized the victims. and exposed the emotional toll the case had on their families. Tragically, Michelle passed away before the Golden State Killer was caught, but her work left an indelible mark. Her efforts sparked renewed interest in the case and inspired those who never stopped searching for justice. Michelle's dream of finding him was about to come true. In 2018, law enforcement took a groundbreaking approach to solving the Golden State Killer case. Traditional methods had failed for decades, but the evolving world of genetic genealogy would soon offer a solution no one saw coming. Investigators had the killer's DNA, but matching it directly to any known database hadn't worked. They needed to think outside the box. This is where genetic genealogy came into play, a revolutionary method that had already been used to trace family trees for millions of people. Investigators uploaded the Golden State Killer's DNA profile to a public genealogy database called GED-Match, a site often used by people looking to explore their family history. The goal was to find distant relatives of the killer, working backward through family lines. It wasn't an easy task. The detectives and genealogists meticulously mapped out family trees, looking for patterns, connections, and any possible links to the killer's DNA. The process involved tracking down fourth and fifth cousins and slowly narrowing down the search. This painstaking effort led them to one family in particular. Among the potential relatives was one man who fit the profile: Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer who lived quietly in California. He had never been a suspect before, but now the pieces were falling into place. DeAngelo matched the age, location, and characteristics of the man investigators had been hunting for decades, but they needed one final confirmation. In April 2018, detectives covertly collected DeAngelo's DNA from a discarded item. It was a perfect match to the crime scene samples, and the Golden State Killer had finally been unmasked. On April 24, 2018, after more than 40 years of evading justice, the Golden State Killer's reign of terror finally came to an end. Joseph James DeAngelo, a 72-year-old former police officer, was living a quiet life in a Sacramento suburb, completely unaware that his past had finally caught up to him. After investigators confirmed the DNA match, law enforcement moved quickly. In the early morning hours, detectives surrounded DeAngelo's home. Neighbors watched in disbelief as the unassuming elderly man they knew as a friendly retiree was taken into custody without a fight. He looked like any ordinary person. One neighbor said, "You never would have guessed he was the monster behind all those terrible crimes." Inside his home, police found more chilling evidence linking DeAngelo to the decades-old crimes. Despite his attempt to blend into suburban life, DeAngelo had been living a double life, a brutal killer who thought he had escaped justice. As news of the arrest spread, there was a mix of shock, relief, and disbelief across California. For the victims and their families, it was the moment they had waited for. The man who had terrorized them, hiding behind a mask of normalcy, was finally going to face the consequences of his horrifying acts. Justice had arrived, and the Golden State Killer's time was up.